A rough week for the banking industry.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank.
The second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
Elon Musk might just have seen into the future. Obviously not in literal terms, but the eccentric billionaire has taken quite an unexpected stand on a topic of today's current economic events. From the Silicon Valley Bank crash to the plummeting stock and the general distrust in banks, Elon has come out to say in a tweet that today's events bear a striking resemblance to the events of 1929, when many banks collapsed and people's way of life changed for the worse. People who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it, they say, so grab a seat, sit down, and let us tell you all about the 1929 economic crisis and if Elon was right that we are on our way to certain doom. Eccentric billionaire Elon Musk has just put up a really disturbing observation, as he believes this year bears a striking resemblance to 1929. Now, of course, he wasn't talking about technology or fashion, but rather something a bit more worrying. Elon was talking about the economy. See, 1929 was a very scary year in modern history as it led to the beginning of an economic recession so dangerous it put thousands of banks out of business quite literally. You're probably thinking, how did things get so bad that even banks had to declare bankruptcy? Well, stick around because we are going for a little history walk. See, the reason thousands of banks failed that year was because 1929 was the start of a tragic historical arc called the Great Depression. Now, it didn't get its name from the fact that an alarming number of people were suffering from depression, but rather because it was a major period of economic depression that was caused by a massive drop in stock prices in the United States. In fact, this depression was so great that although it started in September 1929, it managed to cause the Wall Street stock crash by October of the same year. Lasting for 12 years, the depression saw an unprecedented rise in poverty, unemployment, criminal activity, and death. But perhaps no one felt the impact like the thousands of banks that were forced to close due to bankruptcies. See, during the Depression, anxious bank depositors, due to a lack of confidence in the banks, pulled hundreds of runs on the banks as they all tried to withdraw their money before the bank collapsed. But what exactly is a run in the bank? See, a run on the bank is a tragic situation when many of the bank's depositors begin to withdraw their funds because they fear the bank might fail. And ironically, this mass hysteria and withdrawal of funds is actually what causes the bank to fail. So as you can see, it's actually just a complete negative circle fed by fear and uncertainty, something that was abundant during the Great Depression as people worried about what bank would go under next and what stock would fall next. But then how could a bank possibly fail? After all, they keep the money for future use. Well, if that's what you thought, then you would be completely wrong because a bank, regardless of what it looks like, is still a business venture, and that means they have to make money themselves. So how do they make money? Well, banks make money by using the money deposited by customers as capital to invest in stocks, bonds, businesses, and to give loans. In fact, the major source of income for banks is the interest from loans. See, the difference between the interest rate they pay for deposits and the interest rate they receive on the loans they make is the bank's profit. And so, during the Great Depression, the banks were unable to keep up with their usual business of using customer deposits to invest because the customers were withdrawing all their funds. And to make matters worse, many of their prior investments and loans turned into losses as the stock market crashed, and people found it increasingly hard to pay their loans. Because of this, many smaller banks, such as this one in Haverhill in Iowa, lacked sufficient reserves to stay in business and essentially closed shop. Other banks had lent large portions of their assets for stock market speculation and were virtually put out of business overnight when the market crashed. All in all, about 9,000 banks failed, causing the loss of about $7 billion in depositors' assets. And the worst part was that in the 1930s there was no such thing as deposit insurance, and so when a bank failed, the depositors were simply left without a penny, and the life savings of countless Americans were wiped out by the bank failures. 1929 was quite a scary year in our history, with its effects stretching far into the future before ending in 1941. And so for Elon to say he sees the similarities between this year and 1929, there's a lot to be feared and worried about. One of the reasons Elon Musk made this statement is the recent crash of the uber-famous Silicon Valley Bank. See, Silicon Valley Bank, just like any other bank, invested the money it received from its customers into purchasing billions of dollars worth of bonds. It was a safe and lucrative strategy, but unfortunately, the value of these investments began to plummet when interest rates fell below what a comparable bond would pay in today's market. However, this was just the tip of the iceberg, as the worst was yet to come. The real trouble started when tech companies and startups came knocking, demanding their hard-earned cash. Suddenly, Silicon Valley Bank found itself struggling to secure additional funding, which sent its customers into a frenzy, fearing for the safety of their deposits. The situation quickly escalated, and before anyone knew it, a run on the bank was in full swing. Customers were withdrawing their funds left and right, and Silicon Valley Bank was left reeling. It was like a scene straight out of the 1929 playbook. In the end, regulators had no choice but to step in and seize the bank's assets to protect the remaining deposits and assets. The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank was an unexpected and devastating event, resulting in over $150 million in deposits being frozen in receivership. And sadly, customers were left without access to their hard-earned funds. See, Silicon Valley's unexpected fall led to a wide distrust in smaller banks, causing most people to withdraw their money and move it to larger banks like JP Morgan and Wells Fargo. This, of course, is bound to cause more run on the banks, but that, however, isn't the worst-case scenario, because even the big banks are in debt. See, the rate at which large banks have been giving off loans has dropped significantly in recent years and has caused quite a hefty amount of debt for the banks. And now, with people funneling all their cash into these banks, there is a risk that as this economy starts to crash, so will go so many big banks. After all, how can they pay depositors their money back if the money they are loaning people is underperforming or their investments are not paying back as hoped? The risk of a run on the bank remains very prominent for most of these big banks, as all the people need is a reason to distrust the bank, and the whole house of cards will come down. So to prevent this, banks are trying to convince people to keep their money with them, with banks like Wells Fargo planning to raise up to $9.5 billion through a mixed security shelf offering in order to strengthen their financial position and improve their balance sheet. However, it's only a matter of time before everything comes crashing down, as tech companies continue to lay people off and people grow weary of banks, which in turn causes people to become more and more scared, leading to a drop in the savings rate and a rise in debt. So the question remains, how are banks going to remain solvent when they have more debt than they do deposits? Especially now that, according to Ken Griffin from the Citadel, consumers are taking out about $100 million per month to pay their debt. So Elon was actually onto something when he tweeted about the eerie resemblance between this year and 1929. With the rate at which the economy is beginning to fall, it could be just a matter of time before history repeats itself. But luckily, many have learned from history, and there is still hope for the economy, but only time will tell if we can dodge this bullet or face the music of our actions. But what do you think about the whole prediction issue, or is this just fear caused by the recent fall of Silicon Valley Bank? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more detailed explanations. If you enjoyed this video, you will definitely love this next one. Until next time, stay curious.